I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
We've all found ourselves in situations where we are at odds with an audience. This could be trying to launch an internal initiative within a corporate environment to a reluctant CEO, persuading someone to change an unhealthy behavior, or getting someone with a complete opposite view from you to open up and see things your way. Well, on today's Business of Story, we review the importance of finding common ground to help your stories connect with audiences and move people to action. We're fortunate to have documentary filmmaker Peter Byck join us. Peter's award-winning films, including Garbage and Carbon Nation, have often placed him at odds with audiences because of his subject matter around the highly charged debate on climate change and our impact on it. Peter is a master at finding common ground with the people he interviews and the naysayers who confront him in his sustainable storytelling. You can see how Peter bridges these relationships not only in his work, but in his 2 appearances on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. On today's show, Peter will show you how to overcome nerves when presenting by placing your audience first and foremost in your intentions. The importance of letting serendipity help you find the focus of your storytelling, and why the solution story is one of the most important narratives you can tell to open the hearts and minds of your audiences. So let's find some common ground right now with Peter Byck.
Yeah, so I was making docs. I had lived in LA for 26 years, went to film school at Cal Arts, and then moved back to Kentucky, where I'm from, when my wife and I had our first kid. Just thought we'd go to a place where we could afford a house and have some trees and some family. And about 4 years into that stay in Kentucky is when I met Michael Crow and was brought out here to ASU to teach what I do, which is documentaries with a sustainability thrust. Carbon Nation was the film that got everyone's attention out here. It's a climate change solutions movie that doesn't even care if you believe in climate change. And that common ground piece, I'm sure you and I'll talk about, because it's a big part of the work that I'm doing and that my team's doing. And so I was brought out here to teach, I thought, the sustainability students how to tell stories, how to make documentaries. And then it was Michael Crow's idea to hook me up with the journalism school and the Dean Callahan down there, Chris Callahan. And so we mixed it up. I have students from both schools in my class, and each side teaches the other. So the journalism students teach filmmaking to the sustainability students. The sustainability students teach sustainability to the journalism students. And it's been a really, really good experiment. At first, it was an experiment. I was an experiment. But we're in the 4th year right now, and it's working really well. The students are making, on the whole, really good movies. And I just push them really hard, like I push me.
And how long are these movies? Are these like
5
epic?
minutes?
Oh, they got 5 minutes to tell their story.
Yeah, and one semester we had a story that was so rich, I thought, why don't we have everyone work on 5-minute chunks of the one story? And so that was a 15-minute film that we did a year ago.
Yeah.
Last spring semester last year.
So you're creating some storytellers coming out of both the journalism school and the School of Sustainability.
Yeah, and students from the School of Sustainability, I hired one to be my production manager, and he worked for me for a year. And that was awesome. And another student from Sustainability, she'd never made a film before, but she was sharp. And her name's Ren, and we've just been working together for about a year and a half. She's going back to school now, so she's been editing for me.
Yeah.
And she wasn't in a film school. She wasn't in a journalism school. She was just a visualist.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. So now you've been teaching there, 3-4 years?
I'm just finishing my 4th year, so 8 semesters.
I mean, friggin' time flies so quickly. Amazing. It's hard to believe. And I was just finishing up writing the communications curriculum for the Executive Masters for Sustainability Leadership program, and that's where our 2 worlds have crossed. So I've had a chance to see some of your student films are really, really quite exceptional. How many storytellers do you feel like you've created in the last 3 or 4 years?
I don't know about created is the right way,
okay.
but guided.
Yeah.
Probably about 20 or 30 that are going to keep making films.
Mm-hmm.
And then, one of the things that I want to teach the students, it took me into my 40s to learn it while we were making Carbonation. I was just so stressed out making that movie at times because we had to raise money to start, but we didn't have all the money to finish it. But I had to start it. So I was spending people's money, promising them a $750,000 movie when I'd only raised $100,000. And I was the only one on my team who could do it. And I'd never raised anything close to that amount of money before. So it was this constant stress of raising money and making the movie. But I still had to be my best. And that's what I learned doing that was under that stress, how can I still be at my best? And so with my students, they'll be stressed in the middle of the semester. We're coming right into it right now. We're on week 7 right now. And their films will suck at a certain point. They just will. And I want to teach them to still be their best under that stress because that'll work in any career they've got. But it was really interesting how it took me a long time to get to understand that, to really dig in.
Well, let's come back to that because I want to first talk about Carbonation. Tell our listeners about what that is and how did you get into creating this documentary and where did you take it?
Yeah. So Carbonation is a documentary about solutions to climate change. We made it to be a big tent film. We wanted it to be something that my Uncle Phil would like and conservatives would like and skeptics would like because we thought, in theory, that solutions to climate change would make sense on a number of levels besides climate. And then we learned in the doing that you could come into these solutions through national security or food security or water security. You could come into these situations if you're a steward of the earth through your own spiritual life. And so that was our goal. And we interviewed a lot of people from 2007 to 2010, and it premiered in 2010. And it was a phenomenal experience making it. It was like 3-dimensional research for me. The first year of filming was literally only 15 minutes of the final film, but so much of it was important for me to learn about sustainability, about energy efficiency, about regenerative processes, about what the Department of Defense is doing in this green world and how, getting fuel to the front line is one of the costliest acts in a war. And if you have a lot of inefficient air conditioning units at the front line, air conditioning really inefficient tents, you're throwing oil away and you're throwing lives away because it takes lives to get it out there. Those sorts of things were really interesting drivers to us. And so that film came out in 2010, 2011. And that's when the folks, I was on the road for 3 years. And at one of those conferences where I'm looking for, who am I going to work with next? I met a guy who is on the board of trustees here at ASU. His name's Don Buttinger. And Don introduced me to Michael Crow and Julie Wrigley. Mm-hmm. When I met him, I showed him a couple of the short films from Carbonation because it's a series of short films. And he said, you need to meet these two people and I'll make it happen. And that's what he did. And that's what changed my life.
And that's what brought you at ASU so you could help impact the lives of these students coming through.
And the idea that we were communicating with skeptics, that we were communicating with people who you wouldn't think we would agree with. That was really appealing to Don. And I think that was an eye-opener for other folks here because here you are in Arizona and we have a lot of people with a lot of different political views. But where's that common ground? And in the making of the film, we were hunting for that common ground, but then it was in the distribution and marketing of the movie when I'm out meeting people that I realized that common ground actually was there. I hoped it would be there, but it actually was there.
So when you're talking about common ground, you're talking about someone you would have to go out and interview, and they may be a total climate skeptic. So if you were sitting across from Trump right now, a total climate skeptic, how do you, and obviously you believe in this stuff because you're trying to have an impact, how do you find that common ground? What do you do?
Oh, with Trump immediately or someone like Trump, I would just say, would you rather spend $1 making that beer cold or would you rather spend 50 cents making that beer cold? It would just be that simple. And so that's an energy efficiency argument. Why are you spending X amount of dollars when you could be spending half of that? The trick with Trump is, and I actually saw a Trump building from design to build because I was working with I was being hosted by an architecture firm in Chicago when we started Carbonation, and they were going to build, they designed and then built the Trump Tower, and they designed it to be the most energy efficient building they could think of at the time. But forget what value engineering came in. That's the phrase. And basically the Trump people cut all their energy efficiency stuff out of the building because it cost them money at that point. They weren't going to keep the building. Therefore, they weren't going to save in the energy savings. If they kept the building for 10 years, then it would make sense for them. So I learned something very interesting about, if you're just building a building and then flipping it, you're not going to spend the money to make it energy efficient unless there's incentives, policies, and things like that. So that was actually a Trump building, that one right on the river in Chicago.
Another one.
So that was eye-opening to me. I never heard of something like that. It was shocking to me, but I understand it.
But short-term thinking.
Short-term thinking, but it's also it's a short-term business. He's not his name's on it, but he's not owning it for longer than just selling it. For opening it and selling it, and he's gone. And so those stories, how do you tell policymakers to think about long-term? How do you tell, that was something else that I learned early on in Carbonation, that the person who's in charge of spending the company's energy, who's in charge of their energy procurement, is not the person who's in charge of their equipment procurement. And so to have that separate, the equipment person's being forced and pushed to be as economic as possible, but they're saying, hey, listen, I'm going to be using this gear. We're going to be using this piece of equipment for 10 years. Can't we just factor in the fuel for that whole 10 years and then factor in what's cheaper or not cheaper? And the companies are like, no, you buy the gear. The energy person spends the money on the energy. And then you find out the energy person doesn't exist. And so that's what we found with the Department of Defense. No one was in charge of how much energy was being used. And it was the entity that used more energy than any other entity on Earth.
And you uncovered this in your 3D research of doing Carbonation, basically.
Yeah. And then you find out there's people working on it, right? And so it was fascinating to learn all these things. And so when we talk about common ground, we talk about good business case. We talk about good national security interests. And right now what I'm working on is soils. I'm working on healthy regenerative soils. And so when you talk about healthy soils, you're actually talking about flood mitigation. If a series of farms and ranches in a floodplain or upriver in a river basin, if they're all focused on healthy soil, you actually will have less flooding coming down to that city. So there are economic arguments to make. The farmers and ranchers who are doing the techniques that we're studying right now, we call it adaptive multi-paddock grazing, AMP grazing.
Adaptive multi-paddock. And a paddock, for those who are unfamiliar?
Yeah, it's like an enclosure of what's the space you're giving your animals to walk around in.
Like a pasture-ish type.
But it's a paddock, so it's smaller. And these guys make it an acre for a day. They'll put 800 head of cattle in an acre for a day, or an acre for an hour, and let them move around in a herd like the bison moved across the Great Plains. And they hit it really hard, and their hooves get there, their manure gets there, and they eat only about half the plants because that's what they only want to eat. They don't want to eat it all the way to the ground. And then you move them off, and then that land rests. So that cycling of rest, heavy hit, heavy rest, is how the grasslands and the hoofed animals actually evolved. So we've got these farmers and ranchers who are innovating and are figuring out how to really use nature as their first thing, not the thing they fight, but they're using nature as their starting point, and they're making more money. They're producing more food on the same amount of land. We're just finishing a film right now, and the guy says it's like I just bought 2 farms for the price of 1, because I'm producing twice as much forage and I'm able to produce twice as much meat as a result. And so these are business case good ideas. Those are the things that we're attracted to.
So I got to ask you, I don't know, how old were you when you decided you wanted to really start telling stories for a living and become a documentarian, and now find yourself talking about multi-paddock adaptive grazing?
Yeah,
I mean, it seems like is that what you started with, that you wanted to be in the sustainability world? Or?
Well, it's funny. I saw Koyaanisqatsi last year. We played the film and then had a little conversation after it during the Sustainability Festival last year. We're in February now, so we're having it again this year at ASU.
And that's the film that is just nothing but visuals.
It's life out of balance is what Koyaanisqatsi means. And I hadn't seen it since it came out, and it blew me away by how much that film had influenced me. And then I thought back on the first film that I ever made, and it was pretty much trying to emulate that film. Basically nature has been a factor in everything I've made. From back in 82 when I made the film to get into film school. I mean, it was about, nature and then man screwing it up. That was my first film. And then I made a movie called Garbage in the 90s that won the South by Southwest Film Festival back in '96, and that's about garbage problems across the United States. So I was 16 when I decided I wanted to make movies, and I didn't know how to do it. But that was when I had the moment of, hey, that sounds cool. I heard about the phrase film school, and I was like, that sounds awesome. I was taking lots of still pictures. I loved music, always went to movies. I would see a movie 4 or 5 times. I would hitchhike to the movie theater. And that was just, so it just fit. So that's, to answer your first question, that's how old I was. And then when I look back at all the films that I made, there was a sustainability theme or a regenerative theme or an environmental theme all the way through.
Yeah.
All the way through. And so now that we're focused on soils, that's what 10 years of research has led me to. We've got too much CO2 in the atmosphere. How are we going to deal with it? Well, guess what? The soils love that stuff. The microbial life need all that carbon that's in the atmosphere. It's a placement problem. It's not a problem. And so that's why I'm focused very much on this right now.
And what's interesting, now you are in the position of trying to make soils romantic and interesting and cutting through the noise to get folks' attention about this potential assist in global warming.
So the stories we need to tell, right? The stories we need to tell have to do a lot. And so we're building the blocks for a big story right now, which is scientific research to understand, is this AMP grazing truly regenerating the soils? We think it is for sure, but we're going to measure all the different components of the soils, the microbial life, the amount of carbon that's going into the soil, the amount of methane that's going into the soil versus the amount of methane coming out of the animals. Is it going to be more methane into the soil than coming out of the animals, or is it going to be what they call a greenhouse gas equivalent? So you have carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. Will the system be taking in more of those greenhouse gases than emitting in total? And that's what we're spending. We're raising a lot of money right now to do. And I could say McDonald's just came on board for $4.5 million to help us with this research.
Right on.
They just announced it this week, actually.
Oh, at Green Biz?
It was just weird timing that it would
Gotcha.
be, but it was just this last Monday. And so now we're looking to fill in that gap. That's about 25% of the budget we're looking for. We've got 16 scientists at 6 different universities around the U.S.
Yeah.
It's a big thing. So those are the building blocks for the story. So those are the building blocks. Can we prove that this type of grazing is inherently better than other types of grazing? So we need to be able to tell that honest story with scientific data. And then it's the personal stories.
I was going to say, how do you turn that data into drama?
Well, our short films. So if you go to soilcarboncowboys.com, that we just got that up on Monday, so it's rough, but the films are there and the films aren't rough. And you'll see that we're just telling one personal story after another, after another, after another of these ranchers who have changed the way they've done the way they're treating their animals, the way they're raising their food, and the way they're looking at their soil. And it's just story after story in all sorts of different ecosystems, different rainfall amounts, different everythings all across the country.
And how do you make that interesting to the person that happens across it? Or if they're not already a big believer in this, how do you get that bell curve, the middle of that bell curve that, is like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
What compels me, and I'm sure it compels you, is a personal story. It's someone's own journey. And so I tell that story. We tell the story of how they've come up against this. And we had a lot of farmers and ranchers at the beginning of our project who were going out of business. They were going out of business, and they had to figure out a way to do what they needed to do without spending a lot of money, which means they couldn't afford fertilizer. They couldn't afford pesticides. How are they going to farm without those tools? And they had to figure it out. And now they're teaching other people. So there's a whole lot of storytelling going on right now. And I'm coming in and helping them tell their story. And now we're going to try to see, hey, can our storytelling influence another farmer to look at their soil health primarily and then let everything flow from there? Can our story help 10 farmers do that? Can our stories help 1,000 farmers and ranchers do that? So story is like at the key of our ambitions right now, to get a lot of primarily right now American farmers and ranchers to look at soil health as their first thing, and then everything comes from that. And if they do that, it's a pretty interesting story for them. But if they can change, then there's a lot of really good things that happen for society. Floods will be less. They'll be more resilient in drought. They'll be giving us more food security. They'll be storing a lot of carbon in their soils. We want to count that. We want to verify that. And we want to get them paid for that. So we want to increase their income stream as they regenerate our soils.
Yeah.
And so that's the big story. And it's just one farm at a time, man. One farm at a time.
So your work in this area, and your first two documentaries in particular, got quite a lot of attention. Garbage and Carbon Nation, so much so that it landed you in a couple different segments on Bill Maher, Real Time with Bill Maher.
Yeah. That was Carbon Nation that did that.
Carbon Nation.
Yeah.
So number one, that has to be a little bit, at least for me, I mean, I would be a little bit trepidatious going on there because you're dealing with Bill Maher, but you also have the likes of Mark Cuban and a few others on there of competing for that story. So tell us, how did that come about, and what was it like being on Bill Maher's show?
Well, I work with serendipity quite a bit. The way we make our films, the way we meet the next person to film, and serendipity upon serendipity got us to where a company was distributing our film for Warner Brothers Digital. And they submitted our film. They sent our film over to Bill Maher's producers. And then we were all part of the Environmental Media Awards in the fall of 2011. And Bill Maher's producer was there, and I met him at the after party. And I said, hey, I made a movie called Carbon Nation. He goes, oh, I love your movie. And he started talking, and I realized I was now auditioning to be on the show from that moment on. And they invited me to come to a taping, and I knew I was auditioning. And so every conversation I had, I was auditioning. And before the evening was out, two of the executive producers said, we should have you on our show. So then they have to convince Bill Maher, for me to be on the show. And that took about 8 months.
Oh, really?
I went and visited again, got to meet him a little bit of an audition. I can speak, those sorts of things. And I care about what I'm talking about. And then it was the droughts of 2012 that got the subject.
Made it timely.
Yeah. Put me on their radar. And they called me on a Tuesday, and I was on the show on Friday the first time. And
were your palms sweating? Come on, be honest.
I was very focused. Here's the thing. When I started, goes back to storytelling, really goes right back to storytelling. When back in 2007, when we decided to make Carbon Nation, the night before the team said, let's go for it. Let's start the research. Let's go for it. My aunt had died. My Aunt Sandy had died. And my Uncle Phil, who is the conservative skeptic who sent me climate denier articles the whole time I was making Carbon Nation, before that, he asked me to speak at her celebration, her life celebration. And I got up, and he's a pretty big wig back in New York finance, and he had some pretty big wigs in the audience. And I got up there, and I spoke completely without notes, and I did pretty well. And I remember calling my dad that night saying, Dad, I was just speaking in front of people, and it went really well. And I don't know what it means, but something just happened. I knew something just happened. And it was raising money for Carbon Nation, all the interviewing I did, that enabled me to start working on those storytelling skills, right? And then the funders, the folks who are friends, would feel comfortable for me to meet their next round of friends because they knew I could speak and I'm passionate and I could entertain, right? So it started building. And then the film comes out, and I'm doing interviews, and then I'm doing Q&As. So I'm talking about this stuff all the time, over and over again in front of large audiences. So all that led up to a really cool event that happened in London at the ambassador's home a little bit before that. And it was like a good night. Like, when you're on night, you have your off nights and you have your on nights. And that felt like a peak. And then Bill Maher felt like the next peak, right? So all that work, all that storytelling, all that communication led to me getting on a show and having my 7 minutes with him at the top of the show. And of course, I was meditating all day, and I had lunch with a buddy of mine, and I realized I shouldn't have, because all I need to think about is this, and I care about you, buddy, but I'll care about you after the show tonight. And I just was very focused, doing a lot of breathing, and one of the things I do before I speak publicly is I just say, let me be of service. Let whatever I'm about to say be helpful, and that gets it out of me. It's not like, let me do well. I don't say that ever. I say, let me be helpful to the listener, right? And we talk about that. We talk about the listener. And so, but of course, right before I walk on, Mark Cuban was on that night, and I'll do it so you don't have to bleep it, but he said, don't F up. And he didn't say F. He said the full four letters.
Well, and I loved the segment on there because I was watching it before our show here, and you were talking about garbage.
Right.
And Bill Maher was kind of cracking up, I think just because of the subject in particular. But you're saying, no, this is a wanted product because people can create fuel at it. And then you looked over at Cuban and you said, if I were you, I would be buying landfills. And he kind of cracked up. I think he said, well, I did buy one, but that was for like a server farm. But you're saying to generate the fuel out of it.
Yeah. And that was the after thing that they do where they bring the opening guest on to the panel and you can all chat. But so Bill and I did a one-on-one. So before I'm going one-on-one in my first ever national TV show, Mark Cuban said, don't F up. And so then when I was able to say something a little quippy to him afterwards, but I meant it. It. And he actually was looking at, because all that energy that's in landfills, all that old oil, basically. It's just packed with energy. So a lot of people have, how do we figure out how to use that? How do we utilize that? It's like a mine.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to folks at Waste Management, they're like, yeah, we look at this as mining.
So I want to come back to something you said to close out this portion of the show, and then we'll come back and talk about that common ground a little bit more and really knowing your audiences. But you had said that Carbon Nation took you really from being a documentarian to a nonprofit executive. You had to go out and raise $750,000 to make this happen.
Yeah.
And you said it stressed you out, and that now you learn from that, and you're teaching your students something that we can all learn from is how do you be your best even when you're at the most stressed moment?
Yeah. Yeah. So it did at times stress me out, but when I was interviewing folks, that's a great time because I'm learning. And when I was meeting the people who ended up funding us, and I was out on those fundraising journeys, I met a lot of really cool people. So there was a lot of good in there, but there was a hum of stress the whole time. No question about it. Will the film suck? That's a huge hum in your brain as a film.
That's more like an
At times it sure is. But then you have then there was these moments where we get that one scene together, like, okay, Van Jones, this stuff's starting to kick. Okay, that's good. Okay, the Department of Defense thing. All right, that's starting to come together. So we got these chapters going, and then all of a sudden we had to glue the chapters together. So it was a challenge the whole way through, no question. But it was invigorating. It was really great because up to that point, all of my personal creative work was at nights and weekends while I edited and made stuff for other people. And so this was the first time in my life where my full-time job for 2 years was this film. And so I was just begging to have something I could focus on. And that's what we helped make. And that fundraising stress, so $750,000 to make the movie, another $250,000 to release the movie, and then a whole lot of money that my wife and I never got paid. Mm-hmm. But everyone else did. Everyone on this documentary got paid on time the whole way through, which is in itself remarkable. And that says a lot about our funders, and it says a lot about Krishna, my wife, and how she ran the money. And it says a lot about the integrity of the piece because we were trying to solve things. Mm-hmm. That's what changed my life when I decided to just focus on solutions. And that's what Carbon Nation was all about, solutions. And I've been in that same place ever since. And that's what brought me to ASU. It literally, I tell my students this too, because I'm focused on solutions, people are listening, people are watching the films, they're feeling better. To have high school students watch Carbon Nation jump to their feet when it's done. It was the first time for these folks that they'd heard anything about climate change that inspired them. Mm-hmm. So I had goals, but I didn't know if we'd achieve it. And then being able to achieve it was really, really rewarding, but the stress was there the whole time.
So when you've got that stress ricocheting through you, then it's really going back to being of service to people. Yeah. Like you said, as you're getting ready to go on, don't make me better at this, Lord, universe, or whatever, but let me be a service to these people. And then I suppose when you were in the throes of creating an epic documentary where you're just, and it could suck, absolutely could suck, you go back, am I finding solutions? Am I communicating solutions? Am I about the end product?
Yeah.
And ultimately what it comes down to.
And is it not about me?
Yeah.
And a lot of people wanted me to narrate it, but I didn't even want that to get in the way.
And you got Bill Curtis.
We got Bill Curtis in here.
Awesome.
He's an awesome guy who was working in grass-finished beef, who then, when I started focusing on soils, led me down the road I'm on right now. So there's serendipity in spades.
Who knew Bill Curtis was working in grass-fed beef?
He had a company called Grass-Fed Beef Company or Tallgrass Beef Company.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I want to take a break here for a couple stories. And when we come back, I want to explore a little bit more about this common ground soul that you use that not only helps direct your own story as a documentary, documentarian, but how you use it in creating your documentaries, because our audiences are so important, whether we're interviewing them for our stories or we're trying to create stories on their behalf. And you've got to find this common ground with your audiences. Otherwise, you're pretty much lost, at least in my experience. You got to start there. And so how do you do that when you find yourself completely at odds with your audiences? How do you get in there, take a deep breath, I guess, be humble in front of them and find that common ground so you know what is going to inform your story? So Peter, if we can do that, let's cover that right after these. I was driving into the office this morning when this big Sparklets water truck pulled right out in front of me. Do you know the ones I'm talking about? Big old green delivery truck with the Sparklets name shimmering in silver letters over a blue background. Well, on the back of this particular truck was a simple poster for their website, water.com. It showed 3 mugs, one for tea, one for coffee, and one for hot chocolate, with the headline, "Way more than just water." Now, at first blush, this may seem to be a bit innocuous, but what I like about their simple story is that Sparklets is not selling what they make, water, but what they make happen, tea, coffee, and hot chocolate. In their story, they are reframing this commodity and positioning it as the essential ingredient to the little niceties in our lives. I like that. This, to me, is a great example of the most fundamental point of your brand storytelling. Are you telling stories about what you make or about what you make happen in the lives of your customers? You'll find the latter much more refreshing to your audiences, by the way. And this is why Sparklets, with their simple yet powerful little poster, is my story marketer of the week. And this story underscores a theme in today's show, serendipity. What are the chances of that big old green truck cutting me off, pulling right out in front of me on Camelback Road, and then delivering me that little story? It's amazing, the opportunities that arise before us when we simply pay attention. Thanks for that, Sparklets. People come to me and say, "Park, we've got a great business model. We're making money and we're growing fast, but we don't have our brand story straight." And then I ask them what their biggest pain points are, and they tell me, well, our growth is requiring us to add a lot of new people, and now we don't have everyone pulling in the same direction. Plus, other companies have taken notice of our success, and we don't have a brand story that differentiates us from them. They also tell me that when their bankers or potential investors show up and ask them about their brand story, they don't have a clear narrative to share with them. In fact, that's often the most embarrassing part of not having their brand story straight. So if this sounds like you can start getting your story straight right now by downloading your own Business of Story how-to guide. I take you through the 10 proven steps of the story cycle system, complete with short explainer videos, so I'm there with you every step of the way. This guide will help you define the fundamentals of your authentic story. It'll help you clarify your number one position in your market to differentiate you from your competition, declare your unique value proposition, map your customer journey, and define your brand purpose, among other things. The story cycle system has helped companies like yours grow by as much as 400%. So put the Business of Story workbook to work for you and create epic growth for your enterprise and your people by crafting a story they can all live into and prosper from. Story on. Welcome back to the Business of Story, and our guest today, Peter Byck, who is a famous documentarian, took on Bill Maher head-to-head on his own show, is a professor of practice. I'm not sure what title they've given you now over there. Professor of practice at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, but also working...
And the Julie A. Wrigley School of Sustainability.
Thank you. Yeah, you got those cross-disciplinary.
Dual appointed. So both schools.
That's cool. You got the news side of it, the journalism storytelling side, and the sustainability side. So you are truly a sustainable storyteller over there in the film world.
Yeah. And we created a class that is teaching a lot of other young people how to tell these stories, which has been awesome. But before the break, we were talking about, audience and what happens if you're in an audience that disagrees with you. And I had a lot of conversations of one-on-ones with people after screenings, Q&As, folks who definitely we would be voting for different people 100% of the time. And then I was blown away by those first conversations because I was discovering that there was common ground between us, much more than we both expected. And it shocked both of us. Or any conversation I had, people like clean energy. There's very few people who don't like solar power.
Do you have one man or woman in the back of your mind? It's like, man, I remember that story.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'm flying from Louisville to Denver. The film is done, but we're going to tweak it a little bit more. And I'm going out to a conference. And I'm on a plane, it's 2-seaters, two and two. And I'm on the phone. Guy sits down next to me. I'm clearly talking about the movie. And when I hang up, he goes, oh, so you make movies? And I said, yeah. It's made a movie about solutions to climate change. And he says, you and I are going to disagree about everything. That was his quote.
So let's order drinks and get after it.
And we got after it. And long story short, we realized that we had about 85% in common of what we wanted the country to be.
How did you arrive at that?
Okay. So we're talking, and I showed him a picture of my boy, and my boy had camo on. He had a camo vest. And my grandmother's not a hunter. I'm not a hunter. But there we were wearing camo from Target. He goes, you hunt? I said, no, I don't hunt. Do you? He goes, yeah, I'm going on a hunting trip right now. I'm going to go hunt elk in New Mexico. I said, well, do you eat what you kill? He says, yes, I eat what I kill, or I get it to a food bank. I said, well, then you're a hell of a lot braver than me. He did not expect me to say that. He expected me to judge him for hunting. And I said, hey, listen, I've never killed any animals, but I've eaten plenty of them. You're eating what you kill. Kudos to you, man. That's how it started. And then he said that he rode Harley Davidsons. And I said, do you ever run up Bardstown Road, which is where I live in Louisville? Because these guys ride their Harleys up and down that road. And it was making my baby cry because it was hurting his ears. He was 10 months old. He said, yeah. I said, man, I just want to punch you guys. He goes, why? I said, because you're hurting my kid's ears. He had never thought of that. He had never thought about a kid hearing that sound. So now we're listening to each other. And really we just started saying, okay, let's make one of us president, one of us vice president. We started talking about things, and we talked about the Iraqi war. Did you support it? No, I didn't support it. Were you out in the streets like I was? No, I wasn't out in the streets. Well, then you weren't being you weren't doing your patriotic duty, were you? No, I guess not. And I was teaching him things about the Republican history, and he was teaching me things, and we're listening to each other, but it's not calm, but it's not, we're going to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And then after 2 hours of talking, all the way, the flight's a 2-hour flight into the Denver airport, I said, please watch my movie. I really want to know what you think about this film. 2 months later, he texts me and he thanks me for the film because we didn't blame him. And that was a big part of our approach. Don't blame. Don't blame people for climate change while I'm on a plane burning carbon. Come on, right? So we didn't blame him. He thanked me for Al Gore not being in the film. And we tried like hell to get Al Gore to be in the film. Al Gore knew my face for a while there in 2012, but he just wouldn't do it. And actually, in the long run, I'm glad he didn't because it was enabling our film to talk to a lot of people who he wasn't communicating with. He wasn't getting to. And so our film got to go across that line. And I had a lot of people thank me for that. And then he said, and thank you for the solutions. And he was a pilot. He flew 757s for UPS, which is the 10th largest airline. And he said just coincidentally after he watched our film, where before he watched the film, he wouldn't have even thought about energy efficiency, wouldn't have cared about flying a plane more efficiently. He got paired with UPS's most fuel-efficient pilot right after he watched my movie. And this is the guy that UPS clocks and is saving more money than any other pilot on Earth, the way he flies into and out of jet streams and all those techniques.
It's just serendipity.
Yeah, exactly, right? For him now. And now he wants to be UPS's most fuel-efficient pilot. I had lunch with him and that other guy.
This guy that you were writing, he has made that big of a change.
Yeah. And I still don't know whether he thinks humans are causing climate change. And I really don't care. Because if he does what he's going to do, he's doing it. He's doing what he would do if he did care about climate change. He's going to save fuel in a big way. And so that's the kind of stories that I had over and over and over again. So then 2 years after that, because I was on the road for a while with Carbonation, all over the earth, yeah, all over the Google.
That's appropriate.
Oh my gosh. And this is where the editor brain in me goes, please cut that. And I know he won't because he won't.
Because it's human, Peter.
Stuck.
It's human.
And we're stuck with it. So then Urban Land Institute had a big conference and they saw me on Bill Maher that first time and they asked me to speak to 6,000 people. 6,000, it turned out, incredibly conservative people in October of 2012 who wanted Mitt Romney to become president. And here I am, not wanting Mitt Romney to become president, and I get to speak to them, and I come after Karl Rove, right? So it's a very conservative crowd. And I talked about energy efficiency. I talked about clean energy. I talked about being open-minded. I talked about respectful listening. I talked about it's okay to disagree about some things because you can agree about other things. You don't have to have 100%. I talked about all that stuff that I learned making carbonation and then promoting carbonation. And it was very, very well received by a crowd that definitely was not voting the way I was voting. I had people come up to me at the Denver airport the whole rest of the time I was at that airport who were at that conference, because there's so many people saying, thank you. Mm-hmm. You're the kind of, I wish there was more Democrats like you, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't identify as a Democrat. I feel more independent now than anything. And then I spoke at a smaller event the day after the election, 2012, day after the election. And it was a room of folks who work in HVAC systems. And it was a conference in Louisville, so it was easy for me to get to because I still live there. And I asked my host, I said, how many people here are happy about the election, percentage-wise? He goes, 2, 3%. I said, okay. And I just talked about what I talk about. And at one point, because we were in a smaller room, someone said, man, you're the kind of Democrat I like, right? So I got to write this stuff down, because now, cut to 4 years later, I'm very depressed about the election on the day after the election this year. I'm at a conference here in Phoenix, and I meet a guy, and we're walking to lunch with some students who I'd spoken with and met. And this guy was like a Republican Party operative. He was part of the team that beat Tom Foley, who was the Speaker of the House at that point, to bring in Newt Gingrich's contract with or on America, however you want to look at it. Mm-hmm. And he's been working. He worked for W. He's just been in the Republican world ever since. And now he's a lobbyist for this big group of soil science groups. And so I got this long story from him, because I like asking people what they do. I like hearing their history. And as I'm looking for common ground, I'm listening to what they've done, right? And then I said, well, what do you think about soil health? What do you think about this? Because it's what I'm focused on. He goes, I think it's the most important thing we can be doing right now. So here was this strong Republican operative and I agreeing on what I think is one of the most important things we can be working on right now, which is soil health. It affects our food, affects our health, affects our water, it affects so many things. Mm-hmm. And that gave me solace at a time where I really needed it. But it made me remember that most of the farmers and ranchers that I've filmed probably voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. And there's a story there. I was filming a guy. We haven't finished this film yet. He was like, he had a big appliance dealership in the Southeast, got sick, got cancer, realized maybe his diet had something to do with it, kicked all his wife's horses off his land, found a guy on our team named Alan Williams, who's a brilliant guy in the whole world of grazing and adaptive grazing, and wanted to grow his own grass-finished beef. So Alan was teaching him, and they were 3 years in when I went and filmed him. So I go to this guy's house, beautiful house, and he's got a farm down the way, and we have big barbecue that night, and folks are drinking beers, and we're talking, chatting. We go to bed. We get up the next morning. I film him all day, chatting, all just completely 100% in agreement on everything we're talking about. Then at dinner that night, somehow he says, I never could vote for a Democrat. I could never do that. I said, that's funny. I felt that way about Republicans myself. There was one Republican, Howard Baker from Tennessee. I thought he was pretty good. But other than that, I said, isn't that funny? We've just spent 36 hours together, and we've been in agreement on everything we've been talking about, which is really important stuff. And yet we don't vote for the same people. And so that's where I'm coming at with common ground. I think I truly, truly believe that we are part of a political industrial complex that needs us to think that we don't get along. So we'll watch the shows and listen to the commercials that sell soap. Mm-hmm. I think it's a huge industry. And I do not believe that the majority of Americans are nearly as polarized as people would have us believe right now. But I believe that when people hear it over and over again, they start acting as if they are. And I think that's what we're in right now. So when I look for common ground, I'm not looking to change somebody's mind. I'm looking to find what they already agree on with me or the other folks. And that's what I think Van Jones is looking at that. And it's great. I'm incredibly proud of him. And we've known each other for a long time. He was in Carbon Nation.
Van Jones from CNN.
Yeah.
He's got that show now that they put out every couple weeks, and he's like, what is Get Real? What is
I forget
his
what it's
show?
called, but it's about this.
Yeah, but my only concern with that is they had Whoopi Goldberg on there for an hour, and so I had to sit there and listen to what Whoopi thought about everything. And I'm like, dude, man, that she is one voice in many, and just her celeb isn't going to cut it for me. But I know what you mean. I mean, he does a really nice job. But
his work in Pennsylvania, going out to Trump voters before the election, I thought was really brilliant because it showed respectful listening. It showed that, and I think that as soon as you can start a conversation with someone where you don't start by saying you're an idiot, is really powerful. And
so if I'm the president of the United States, I probably shouldn't start a press conference with saying, "Look, you guys are all fake news organizations. You and you and you and you and you."
Yeah, his storytelling is it's unique, and it's dark, and it's disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
But you just hope there's enough sanity around him, you know, and I know for a fact that there's a lot of people who voted for him that are good people.
Yeah.
And that's what Van is saying. And that's what I'm really happy about him saying, because it's true. But the point being, the common ground for me is most powerful when it's already there and you can uncover it. And it takes a little while to uncover it because people get so defensive, but when I meet someone who's a climate skeptic, I'll say, "Hey, nice to meet you. For me, climate change is real. It's happening. Science is strong, and the solutions for it are going to be really good for a lot of people. What do you think?" And that's the magic moment.
So to bring this full circle and
let me just finish that real quick.
Oh, certainly.
The "what do you think?" they haven't heard someone like me ask them before. They haven't heard that. So they're already feeling better. And they said, "Thanks for asking." Consistent. I've had this conversation 1,000 times. And they say, climate change is a hoax, Al Gore is a fraud, and the scientists are just studying it because that's where the grant money is. I say, okay, fine. I'm not going to change your opinion about climate change right now, am I? And they're saying no. And I'm smiling, and they're smiling. And I said, "And you're not going to change my opinion about climate change, are you?" And they're like, "No." Okay, well, why don't we just put that over here for a second? What do you think of solar, wind, energy efficiency? And then we find that there's enormous common ground on enormously important things, soil health, all these things that we never would have even gotten to under the normal rules of engagement that are going on right now. So I just wanted to finish that point because it's very effective. And I'm not pandering. I'm not acting like I don't believe in climate change because I know they don't. I'm just telling them what I feel. Americans love when you stand up for what you believe in, especially conservatives. Go to the mat, but be respectful. There's a way to do that. And that's what I'm consistently working on, consistently looking for. That's the through line.
Yeah.
That's the through line.
So and I apologize for jumping in on that because I love what you said there. And so to wrap this up, you've covered a lot on this common ground. What are the 2 or 3 things that we can do, our listeners can do right now when they know that they're going into maybe a contentious conversation or they're having to interview someone to help create a story around, it could be a brand, mission, a corporate thing, or they're trying to sell some initiative within the C-suite and they know that they're going to encounter a bunch of cross-armed execs like, "Sell me." What can we do to find the common ground that puts us on equal footing but gives us a bit of a leg up in our storytelling?
Well, certainly TJ DiCaprio taught me this. She's at Microsoft. She's the one who thought of this internal carbon fee, internal carbon tax, and she had to learn the CFO's language. So I think within the companies, and we hear this a lot at GreenBiz too, learn the language of the CFO. So as you're talking about your initiative, how's it going to save money and what's the ROI, right? That seems like a no-brainer. When I'm talking to a bunch of people who I'm pretty sure don't agree with me. So I was in Kentucky a couple weeks before this last election, and I was at an ag conference, and I'm pretty sure most of the people in that room are going to be voting for Trump. I don't say, "Hey, I'm voting for who," I don't come out and say who I'm voting for because it's so unimportant on so many levels, but I let them know what I think about climate change, and I let them know how I came to this subject. Why is this filmmaker talking to you about soil health? I tell them my evolution. Solutions to climate change. Too much CO2 up in the atmosphere. How do you take care of that? Oh, wow, the soils could be one of the most incredibly powerful ways to take care of that. Grazing is one of the ways to stoke the soils. Okay, that's how I'm here. And then what they get is they get the truth, and they find whatever they want within that they find. What I hear from folks who politically I disagree with is they're very happy I'm not attacking them. You know, there's a lot of ranching and grazing and cattle producers that have been attacked for a long time. And I say, these methods look like ways for you to be heroes. And they aren't expecting that. So in a way, I'm bringing a solution. And that's the game.
Mm-hmm. And placing them then at the center of the story by understanding them and sharing their version of the story.
Which is your theory.
Yeah.
It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's about them. And so when I go speak publicly, when I'm feeling those nerves before I go on stage, I think about those farmers and ranchers. I think about them, right? And I think about the scientists on my team who are just itching to study this stuff because they know something's going on there and they want to prove it. They want to try to prove it. It costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about them and I think about my little boys who call it my boring cows, you know, and I just, it's helpful to think about others. And so that's how I go into a room with folks who I don't agree with. I try to think about them. I don't always do it very well, but if I could do it a little bit, everyone likes that. Everyone likes to be thought of. Everyone likes to be considered. Everyone likes to be heard. Right?
Absolutely.
And so if I can start that conversation with people I disagree with by giving them that, I've got a really good chance of hearing what they have to say. Now that is good business for a person who makes a living, documentary filmmaker, by what people tell me while my camera is rolling. If they don't tell it to me while my camera is rolling, it doesn't exist for my film. So I've learned to show people true respect in how I can listen. And they tell me things. And sometimes I'm blown away by they just said that, right? They just said that? That's awesome. We're using that. I don't know if I would have been saying that myself, but they just said that. And then how I continue that goodwill is I never edit them out of context. And I really push my students this way. Cronkite School pushes this very much. It's not...
So we're not creating a bunch of fake news journalists coming out.
Yeah.
These people are actually looking and telling the truth.
You have to cut them completely in context.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're cutting a documentary, you've cut docs, it's late at night, you can make them say that. And yeah, it's not exactly what they meant, but God, it's going to help me finish this thing out, and I got a deadline. We don't do that.
Yeah. How can people see your work? Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, all the new films are up at soilcarboncowboys.com.
Soilcarboncowboys.com.
Yeah, and then carbonnation.tv is the original site.
Uh-huh.
And so Carbon Nation to see the old films, the feature film, we're about to put it up for free for the first time. And then Soil Carbon Cowboys is where all the new stuff is, all the research. You can see our proposal. You can see, I think it's going to be 7 or 8 films that are up there right now.
And you can see some really terrific storytelling take place. Again, I come back to this idea of how do you make soil interesting and romantic and get people involved in it? Go and check it out because Peter does a really wonderful job with this.
Well, I'm part of a team.
Yeah.
And my editor, Hal Honigsberg, is a big part of that team. And Ren Andres, who's the student who's cut a couple of these too. So those editors, editors are writers, and especially in documentaries. And so as I did a lot of editing, so I understand what it takes to edit in docs. It's incredibly difficult. And I love the fact that I've been able to raise money to hire people to do that, so I could be here talking to you. But the editor partner on these films is critical.
Well, and you can go to the show notes on this program too. We'll have links to all of Peter's work there, and the Bill Maher interviews. They're fun. We'll have those up there as well.
Yeah, we'll see if we can do a runaround on HBO. See if we can get them up there.
There you go. Thank you for being here on Business of Story today. It's been a real privilege having you here.
Oh, thank you, Park. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening to this edition of Business of Story. Join us, again next Monday when we will have another story artist on to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. In the meantime, visit me over at businessofstory.com. I've got plenty of tools in past episodes that you can use to help reignite within you that one true superpower we all possess, that power of storytelling to help you nudge the world in any direction you choose. So thanks for listening, and until next Monday, have a wonderful life.